Started on our final webinar on transformative strategy. This is the 6th webinar in our Transformative Movement Building webinar series, and this is a collaboration between the Movement Strategy Center and Move to End Violence. My name is Mimi Ho, and I'm the co-director here at Movement Strategy Center, and I will be your MC today. We are very excited to present this series. Movement Strategy Center has been a longtime partner of the Move to End Violence, a program of the Novo Foundation that aims to strengthen leaders, organizations, and the movement as a whole working to end violence against all girls and women. Over the years of this partnership, we have informed and shaped each other's work, and it has been an honor to learn alongside with all of you who are participating in this webinar as well. This series is an opportunity to share the work that we've been learning together all along, to share with all of you and anyone who is interested in how to build powerful movements for social change. We hope these webinars introduce some shared language and concepts and help spark more conversations about the kind of movement we need, how we'll get there, and we trust that with everything brewing in the air, there will be lots of action as well. This is the last of a 6-part series. The first one introduced core concepts, and the next 4, we dug into the 4 elements of transformative movement building: vision and purpose, deep embodiment through practice, radical connection, and strategic navigation. Today, we are taking it up a notch, and we are exploring strategy for transformation, which is a different pathway than incremental change strategies, and we'll get to hear from our panelists today about that. Our objectives today are to understand the difference between incremental change and transformation, to provide a framework to prepare for transformation for movement building, and to understand how transformative movement building practices relate to strategy for transformation. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and you will be able to request this link on the Move to End Violence website in the next day or so. We will also be emailing that to you. And if you're using social media, please use #transformativemovements, no spaces. We've also reserved some time for question and answer towards the end, but even before then, there are ways for you to participate. You can use the chat function as you have been using already. And in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, there's a Q&A option, and you can also leave your questions there. We'll keep an eye on both the chat as well as the Q&A to pull out your questions that we'll go to at the end of the webinar. And also, as you can tell, in the chat function, you can communicate live and answer any of the questions that might be prompted as you go along, or just to communicate and give your thoughts as we go along. So we are really excited to have some fantastic guests with us today, Annika Gifford brothers and Aimee Thompson. They will be sharing the story of creating just enough infrastructure and network to experiment with transformative strategies grounded in the movements to end gender-based violence, but that go far beyond that. First, however, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rosa Gonzalez, who is going to give us some more context about strategic navigation in transformative movement building. And I think you're going to love Rosa's presentation. Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, Mimi. Like Mimi said, my name is Rosa Gonzalez, and I facilitate the Community Climate Solutions team at Movement Strategy Center. And I'm just totally moved right now by everyone's comments. They are resonating with me really deeply. So appreciating the level of reflection there in the chat. I wanted to share just a little bit about my own sort of movement history to start. I was born into the movimiento, as my dad would call it. That's him there holding the huelga flag and standing next to my mom in probably 1973, around the time that I was conceived. And they had met at a United Farm Workers meeting and organized around labor rights together in Santa Barbara, where I grew up. And it turns out their commitment to human rights and dignity was stronger than their commitment to each other. And so they were only together till I was about 1.5 years. My dad dedicated his life to organizing and movement building in San Jose, California, and my mom dedicated her life to paying the rent each month in Santa Barbara. And so I grew up between families, between cultures, between socioeconomic realities, between consumerism and socialism, between education as a revolutionary act and partying as a rebellious one. One of the ways that I learned to navigate these different schisms in my life was to compartmentalize the different parts of who I was. And so for that reason, when I look back at the movement work I've done, I realize it's been just as much about my own journey to wholeness as it has been about social justice. And what I come to learn on deeper and deeper levels is that neither of these two things can actually happen without the other. Our own healing and wholeness is inextricably linked to our societal reparations. My early work in Guatemala, where part of my dad's family is from, was focused on the question, how do we ensure that Indigenous women and all those impacted by economic and environmental policy actually have a voice in shaping that policy? And it was this question that led me to education as a critical to building the voice and power of politically marginalized communities. And I knew it couldn't be conventional education models because they can undermine the cultural wealth of Indigenous communities that's so vital to solving the economic and ecological problems that we face. So I've dedicated most of my life to culturally rooted popular education approaches with a focus on activating the knowledge, wisdom, and leadership of communities whose voices must be heard. Long story short, I ended up becoming a middle school teacher and helping to start a neighborhood school in East Oakland. And when I wasn't teaching, I was doing popular theater, first with Los del Pueblo Actors Lab, and then with a group that we founded called Head Rush. And we used spoken word and one-act satirical plays to illuminate the absurdity of Bush-era economics, the Patriot Act, state-sponsored violence, the ongoing attacks against public education, against nature, and against migrant families. We were dedicated to the power of story to connect the dots between issues and to connect people to our own power. And theater also helped me to connect with my body and to use embodiment practice within my work as a facilitator and an educator. But at the same time, the performative aspects of theater kept part of my consciousness stuck at the surface level. And ultimately, my work became unsustainable for me on the physical and emotional levels because I wasn't taking care of my inner world enough. And it's really been through a commitment to daily and deep practice of yoga and meditation, as well as a commitment to ceremony that's helped me to connect with an internal source of energy that I'm learning is really love. As soon as I started dedicating time to my inner work, my work in the world also expanded. I organized with my neighbors to take over an empty lot and transform it into a neighborhood garden. I started working with organizations at the regional level, bringing the power of story and relationship to movement building around economic and environmental issues in regions around the country. And so we're about to look at the core components of strategy for transformation. But if I were to boil it down to one thing, it would be our shared connection to that love that is in all things and beyond all things. And becoming increasingly aware of that love, it is what has been at the heart of my own personal transformation and my ever evolving understanding of power. So, strategy for transformation. Transformation, as you know, is a word that's used a lot these days, but it's rarely defined clearly or connected to political strategy. And so we're really grateful to Norma Wong, Zen master and native Hawaiian nation building strategist, for articulating how strategy for transformation is distinct from incremental change strategies. She draws on these two areas of practice, change and transformation, in her teaching, and does so in a way that's rooted in Indigenous wisdom. So, what is the difference between change and transformation? If you have ideas about that, please put it in the chat, and I'll say a few words about it. We often use change and transformation interchangeably, but it's important now to make a clear distinction. Change is what we are most familiar with, particularly within advocacy work. Change can be defined by a few qualities. It's linear, logical. It happens in incremental steps towards a goal. For example, if our goal right now, given the state of the US democracy, is a democracy that is more effective at representing the needs of all people in the country, we might focus on a series of reforms to the current system. We could take on a campaign on campaign finance reform, or work for laws that secure voting rights for all people. And each of these incremental changes would get us closer to a more fair and just democracy. Transformation, on the other hand, has very different qualities. Transformation is nonlinear. It happens in leaps and bounds. It happens from the inside out. And it can only happen when people are ready. Similar to surfing, we can't predict when the wave will come, but we need to be in the water and ready for it when it does. A transformation goal in this moment might be a shift to a deep democracy in which governance is rooted in a sense of deep responsibility to people and place. Beyond just changing the law, a shift to a deep democracy will happen as a result of internal shifts within each of us, awakening to our interdependence, seeing how our destinies are wrapped up in the destinies of even the people we might feel are our political enemies. A transformation like this requires a very different type of strategy than we're used to. So then let's look at the differences between a change strategy and a strategy for transformation. I don't think I need to say too much about change strategy because most of us are already familiar with it. If you've ever been part of a campaign or you've taken part in a strategic planning process for an organization, you've probably engaged in change strategy. It's fairly straightforward. You set a goal or articulate a vision. You assess where you are now vis-a-vis that vision, sometimes through a SWOT or a power mapping. And then based on your assessment, you define a set of tactics and action steps to advance towards your goal or vision. This is a very useful and a productive approach to achieving our change goals. If, however, our goals are more about transformation, then, and we would say, given the current state of affairs, increasingly our goals need to be about fundamental shifts or transformations, then we approach our strategy differently. First, we must think big. What are the problems we want to address? And then what are the fundamental shifts needed to transform reality so that those problems become obsolete? And then how will the world be different as a result of these deeper shifts? Once we have a bold vision, we look out among our relations and find people who have a similar appetite for transformation. And people who are willing to do the inner work and the work in the world that reflects our vision. Together with our radical teams, we reflect on our vision, and in the spirit of being the transformation we want to see in the world, we identify what are the qualities that reflect our vision and what are the practices that cultivate those qualities. Just like surfers, we jump into the water, face our fears together, paddle to build up our strength, practice catching smaller waves, and ready ourselves for the big swell. Doesn't it feel like there's a big swell coming soon? It's time for us to get clear on our visions and jump into the water. Transformation strategy is about going slow to go big and achieve fundamental shifts. Taking the time to build meaningful relationships through shared practices is what prepares us to venture together into uncharted territories. The recent victory at Standing Rock is a powerful example of this. The protectors used ceremony, prayer, and the practices of nonviolent direct action. This is what they stayed focused on. And in this way, they brought forth ancestral wisdom and shared strength that allowed them to withstand and skillfully navigate whatever the authorities brought down on them. They did not move towards their vision, they embodied their vision, honoring the sacredness of life throughout the whole process. Once a movement successfully makes it through battles like this, leaders can use the insights they've gained from navigating the unknown to identify the right paths up the mountain. In the case of Standing Rock, it will be up to the Lakota Sioux and their partners to decide what paths to take. But it could look like passing laws to officially prohibit fossil fuel activities on Sioux treaty lands, or building native-owned renewable energy systems that create new jobs for the next generation. Essentially, the paths up the mountain are concrete solutions that are made possible by taking bold leaps together. Going back to the vision of a deep democracy, some of the core values and qualities at the heart of it could be deep responsibility for people and place, the ability to embrace and transcend the schisms between us, creativity, wholeness, all of which stem from love at the center. To cultivate wholeness, there are a number of practices we can commit to that send us out into the sea of uncharted territories. On the internal level, we can commit to doing our inner work in culturally rooted ways that reconnect us to our ancestral wisdom and give us the strength to increasingly show up as our fuller selves. We explore the depth of love needed to take full responsibility for people and place. On the organizational level, we can break down unnecessary silos and find the interconnections between the different bodies of our work to cultivate comprehensive solutions that are rooted in place. At the structural and cultural levels, we commit to whole systems thinking and whole systems solutions, because transformation strategy recognizes that the problems are connected and the communities at the forefront of our movements actually experience reality at the intersection of the issues. We're facing a set of interconnected systemic problems, making life more difficult for most of us while power stagnates and accumulates in the hands of a few. Because the problems are deep and interconnected, the solutions must be equally deep and connected. For example, in the Community Climate Solutions team at MSC, we're working to build the field of community-driven climate resilience planning that brings impacted communities together around bold visions for long-term climate resilience, linking economic, environmental, and social justice solutions for comprehensive plans and power-building strategies to influence and ultimately partner with cities around implementation of community-derived solutions. This takes the formation of multi-partner tables with members who can connect the dots between their areas of experience and embrace their distinct perspectives as assets in the quest for whole system solutions. What we're seeing in the emerging transformative movements is a recognition that there are a set of core values at the heart of the crises we face, and an alternative set of unifying values embedded in the solutions emerging across different movements and communities. Transformation processes are a mirroring process. To transform our society, we must transform our movements. To transform our movements, we have to transform ourselves. Movements are able to affect us at all levels of human experience simultaneously, which is one of their unique characteristics. The second dimension of transformative movement is that it is not about incremental change. It is about shifting reality exponentially. We sometimes take for granted the fundamental shifts that occurred as a result of the movement work of the 1960s and 70s because so many injustices still exist. Well, one of the things my dad taught me when I was beginning to explore movement building as a young person was that before the Chicano movement of the 1960s and 70s, the vast majority of Mexican Americans did not question their status as second-class citizens and did not expect to have their voices heard on the issues that impacted them. Most sought to assimilate into mainstream America and deny the cultural wealth that they carried. Inspired by the Black Power movement, many young Mexican Americans began to reclaim their indigenous identities and, as Native people of this continent, their right to not only be in this country, but to help shape its future. Within just a few years, in exponential leaps and bounds, the Chicano movement was born, and by 1970 held the largest march against the Vietnam War held by any minority group in the US, turning out 30,000 people. This spirit and practice of organizing and mobilization that's rooted in indigenous identity persists to this day, with more Latinos civically active than ever before. And we see similar exponential leaps in movements in this country and around the world. And most can be traced back to just a few people with a bold vision and a commitment to personal liberation. I think it's important to say a little bit more about practices. A lot of folks were mentioning consistency in the chat, and consistent practice is such a vital component of transformation strategy. The opposite of conscious practices are unconscious habits or tendencies, and movements can be easily undermined by unchecked habits that result in unstrategic actions. One of our most common movement habits is judging the work of others in ways that keeps us disconnected and full of distrust. This habit undermines our ability to form the kind of alliances necessary to build enough power to shift the status quo. A conscious practice, on the other hand, might be authentic communication to name and work through differences. This practice can build deep, trusting relationships and can that have the power to withstand political adversity. And practices like that, authentic communication, embracing our differences and seeing the wealth in them, working through challenges like that, they take, it requires us to be internally strong and clear, which is why embodied, culturally rooted, consistent daily practice is so important. The National Domestic Workers Alliance is a great example of this. They've identified 3 core elements of a transformative campaign: leadership development that recognizes trauma and facilitates healing, campaign capacity, and transformative organizing skills. And to nurture these capacities, the Alliance holds an annual 16-day program called SOL, standing for Strategy, Organizing, and Leadership. At SOL, Alliance members experience the power of embodied leadership that is rooted in a clear strategic direction. Through storytelling, deep listening, and generative somatic practices, the group explores ways to heal as individuals while also leading organizations and movements that are struggling with trauma. These practices then fuel audacious campaigns that have helped the NDWA to become a tremendous force in national and even international labor policy. We've articulated 4 sort of fundamental practices of transformational movement building. And the first, like we've talked about, is leading with bold vision. There's a pattern within social justice movements of leading with the problem. And it's important to define and call out problems. And it's also easy and a very natural thing to do. But if we stay there and continue to lead with problems, it can keep us in a reactive state, which drains our energy and can become especially exhausting for impacted communities. Most communities who live at the intersection of social, economic, environmental, and political crises understand the problems well. The muscle that we need to exercise more is that of envisioning a new story of the future, painting a picture of possibility that speaks to our core human values and galvanizes and strengthens communities across difference. Second is embodied practice, like we've talked about. These can take many forms. I recommend culturally rooted embodiment practice, and that can range from indigenous ceremony to Tai Chi, dance, theater, yoga, meditation, breathwork, and generative somatics. What's critical is that our embodied practice be consistent and conscious. Through consistency, with active awareness, that's how we activate layers of consciousness, I'm losing my voice, and love. Excuse me. I also need practice for my voice. Layers of consciousness and love that are the fuel for bold, exponential leaps. The next practice that's actually woven throughout all the practices is radical connection. I see that very much evidenced in the comments in the chat. We know that relationships are so important because nothing ever happens without trusting relationships in place. But there's another level of action and movement that's possible when people regard each other as family, as kin, and they know well, we know that we can turn to each other at any time and have each other's back. I see this in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, where people are connected through a deep sense of aloha. I see it in youth organizing efforts throughout California, where people are cultivating trusting networks of support and mentorship. I see it in the Colectiva de Mujeres that I work with in Salinas, California, where women sit in circle together every week and then stand in solidarity with one another on a range of local and statewide fights. I see it in the Comadres network that I'm a part of, where the level of healing and prayer we've done together translates into each of us responding wholeheartedly to any request from another comadre. In all these cases, being together in circle and making time for sharing story is what makes radical connection possible. Leading with a bold vision and clarity of purpose, engaging in constant, consistent practice that cultivates our core values and qualities at the heart of the vision, and engaging in radical connection is what makes the final practice of strategic navigation possible. Unlike strategic planning, in which strategy decisions are made ahead of time and written down in a strategic plan, strategic navigation is the practice of making decisions in real time as landscapes and conditions change and new challenges arise. Guided by a constellation of core values and held accountable by genuine relationships, we are able to make choices that reflect our visions, bring our full selves forward, and strengthen our communities. And so I just want to end by saying, no matter what movement we are working in or what issue that we're taking on, it's really in this moment that together, by really feeling into that deep interconnection, we can transition from a world where few live at the expenses of the many to a world where the many govern for the benefit of all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosa. Always really appreciate hearing your story and just the amazing way you've brought us through what transformative strategy is. It's not one that we feel and live into often, but it's what actually has impact. So thank you so much. And I'd like to introduce next a couple of fantastic guests we have. We have Annika Gifford's brothers, who is with us, and also Aimee Thompson. And we are first going to be hearing from Annika, and she is a longtime movement builder. She in the movement to end gender-based violence. She has incredible experience both here in the U.S. and internationally, from Croatia to Costa Rica. And anyone who has been in her presence know that she brings both brilliance and spirit to everything that she does. We're very lucky to have her. She's, along with Aimee, one of the co-leaders in the network, which is an exciting network in the landscape emerging from the movements to end gender-based violence and beyond. So we'll hear from Annika and Aimee, who will introduce themselves as well. So Annika, tell us about how you came to the work that you do and what drives that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi, Rosa, MSC, and everyone on the webinar. I had a chance to look through who's here and feel like I'm with family. And just very grateful for this time to connect, and really grateful to be in this world and work with all of you. And I'm also in -8 Minnesota right now. So when Rosa was talking about surfing and water, and then Mimi, when you introduced me and talked about Croatia and Costa Rica, I wish I could teleport myself there right now. So a little bit about myself. So as Mimi mentioned, my name is Annika Gifford Brothers. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we'll talk a little bit more about the network, which is both a vehicle, a transformative vehicle, and a strategy. But before we do that, I wanted to share a little bit about myself as it relates to this work and the purpose of our time together today. So I was born in Seoul, South Korea in the late 1970s. I just celebrated my 40th birthday, or as I sometimes refer to as my 25th birthday plus 15. I was adopted when I was just shy of 6 months old. And I don't actually know much about my biological family other than what my birth mother shared at the hospital after I was born, and she abdicated her parental rights. What I do know is that my birth mother was in her mid to late 40s, and she already had a handful of other children. She was uneducated and poor and did not want more children because they could barely take care of the ones that they had. She also described my biological father as abusive and mean. And as soon as he found out that she was pregnant with me, he abandoned his family and left them with no money or means. And the last statement that she made at the hospital was that she knew that she couldn't provide me with the life that she wanted to, and that she wanted me to have more and be happy. So after 6 months at the orphanage, I got on my first flight as a chubby little Korean baby and traveled halfway across the world to Minnesota, where I fell in love with my parents, Sheldon and Heidi, whom I affectionately call Shidi. I share this story because part of, I believe, how I came into this world is really what grounds and guides me to be in this work. The why, the what for, the how, and whom with. And it also affirms what I believe is our humanity and connection as people. It reminds me to dream big and to dream forward. And it humbly reminds me that sometimes I and all of us will have to give up and let go of things for those dreams to come true. So, as related to transformation, so many of you very honestly and generously shared some of your reflections and thoughts about transformation, and so much of that really resonated with me. Thinking about sort of pre-transformation, and I'll have to think of some catchy little letters to go with that. I know I probably could have done good work and even impactful and important work without doing deeper work on myself. I feel like we're in sometimes habits and certain things are reinforced, and there are lots of different reasons and analysis of why that could be. And I don't actually know if there was a particular event or moment in time that sort of awakened and activated my own path of transformation. I do believe that it always lived in me. And I'm also not a person who's afraid of risks, which is exciting for me, not so much for some people around me, but I'm not risk averse. So I guess that's an asset in transformation. And as Rosa noted, that transformation is not linear, which is incredibly awesome, or I would have been out a long time ago, because it has been messy and it has been hard. It's been beautiful, lonely at times, brilliant, and pretty much everything in between. And so something that, again, what so many of you shared in the chat and in conversations with other folks, that the path, I believe, of transformation is ours alone. But I'm humbled and feel very honored to know that we aren't walking or making that journey alone. So here I am, and some things that I ask myself that feel relevant to the purpose of why we're all here today. And I'm not someone who typically sets New Year's resolutions as much as reflections. So as we close out what we'll generously call a fraught 2016, that's the PG recorded version of how I'll quickly describe 2016. I find myself asking, reflecting on, exploring, and in really rich and deep conversations with so many of you about what is the work that I need to do so that I can embody, emanate, and be ready for, as well as take the big, bold leaps that are necessary in this moment and all moments to come. So that is something that I'm sitting with, and will continue to, and would love to be in conversation and practice with all of you around. And what I'll say is what gives me, I guess, hope in this moment in time is all of you, is myself, and for the magic of our relationships, our connections, our values, our dreams, our wisdom individually and collectively, including owning what we know and have always known and what has lived in us, and also what we're still learning, right? As well as the practices that we're grounded in, and the badass collective leadership, action, and strategies that I know this community and others possess to really transform ourselves and the world. So that's a little bit about myself and my own journey, and I'm grateful to be on with Aimee, who will share a little bit more about one of many transformative vehicles and strategies that I believe really reflects both the people and possibilities of transformation of self, ways of being, and approaches to building, animating, and activating movement. The time is ours, friends.
Great. Thank you, Annika. Really appreciate having been in spaces with you now, just the sincerity with which you bring your own transformation, and also the humor you bring to your transformation that we all can learn from and have to have in order to do the hard work. So thank you. So I want to
actually, Mimi, I'm actually not able to hear you. I don't know if others are able to hear you, but the audio seems to have dropped. It seems like from the chat that that's the case for others also. No, we still can't hear.
Okay, can you hear now?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Did I drop off after talking about singing Annika's praises?
Yes, right as you started to transition.
Do it again.
I finished it and I had to drop the mic, literally. So, so Aimee, I welcome, and I want to really appreciate you have also been a long-time movement builder in the movements to end gender-based violence. You helped found Close to Home, and you have and Aimee is currently in Boston and has an adorable son. So she's also a co-leader with Annika in the network, and want to give you a chance to share about that.
Sure. Well, I also just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here in this amazing space with everyone, and also say thanks, Annika, for sharing your story the way you did. It's like such a joy to be able to work with you on a daily basis. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about this thing called the network, which we're actually working to find a proper name for. But and as part of that, I'll share a little bit more about myself along the way too. But so I was very fortunate to be a cohort member of Move to End Violence, which I think many probably know if you participated on these webinars before, is a program of the NOVA Foundation. And the way that it's structured is there's a series of 5 cohorts of leaders from the movement to end gender violence in the US. And it's a capacity building program. So each cohort has a tenure for about 1.5 to 2 years. And it's been an amazing experience for me, and I think for others, not to speak for others, but I think that for myself personally, it was an amazing experience in the cohort. And so while we were in that cohort experience, we really were able to engage in these 4 practices of transformative movement building. So we had an opportunity to really sit and think about our vision. What is the world we want to create? Not only create, but actually what's the world that we want to live into and practice being now. So this piece around leading with purpose and vision, we also had this opportunity to really cultivate some shared practices connected to embodiment through Tai Chi, through breathing, other elements of forward stance practice. And so that was shared sort of within each cohort and then across cohorts, and that's been shared in other parts of the movement. There was also a really strong emphasis, a wonderful emphasis on this notion of radical connection, or really building deep relationships or beloved community, as we came to call it, and not in the utopic sense of that, but in the sense of that it is uncomfortable. I loved so much of the language that was evoked earlier in the chat. There so much discomfort about telling the truth, about really holding each other accountable, but with love. And so as we were kind of holding all of these things as cohort members, the question really became, okay, we have all of this. Now, how do we actually navigate change together? How do we stay connected and really intentionally create change? And so what grew out of that was this sense, or some questions related to what is the form of our connection and our movement building work. And so I have some experience thinking about network theory. As Mimi mentioned, I, for 15 years, led an organization called Close to Home that looked at how in local communities we can build networks to transform violence. And I come from, actually my family is about 2 hours northwest of where Annika's sitting today. And I come from multiple generations of dairy farmers and multiple generations of violence. And so as we're in this holiday season, and as I've been in holiday seasons in the past, really grappling with this question of what does it mean to sit at the table with family members who've used violence against each other, sexual violence, domestic violence, and how do we transform that? And how do we really create change at that level of our social networks? And then what does that mean at the community level? And so the development of Close to Home was really about how do we engage at the community level to transform this violence? And we found using network structures a really helpful way to do that because they're dynamic, because they're nimble. And so as we were really thinking about what is the way forward for movement makers that have all of these transformative practices, we really thought that a network structure was an exciting opportunity to test and see, is this a way to really do transformative strategy? And part of the reason for that, if I think back to the concepts that Rosa was talking about in terms of change and the incremental nature of change, a lot of those elements actually really relate to me to many of the organizational ways that we work, and in the even industrial hierarchical ways that we organize our work and our movements often. And that part of what we want to move towards is a more transformative, like looking at more transformative strategy and transformative structures to help us engage in change work, where power is distributed, where power is shared, where we can experiment, where we can try things, where we can be innovative, where we're working with a lot of awareness, both within ourselves and then what's happening in the ecosystem. We're learning from each other. We're able to really embody the values, the sort of values, again, that we want to lean into and live into that are part of our vision. And so really that is part of the foundation that we're using to sort of play with this network concept, this intentional network that we're trying to build. And so some of the strategies that we're engaging in within that are that we've self-organized, some practice groups have self-organized to work on key areas of change in the movement, which include centering young women and girls of color in participatory governance exercises and organizing in different cities across the country. There are also organizers working in communities, particularly immigrant communities, communities of color, LGBT communities, that are organizing to transform violence within family violence, domestic and sexual violence within those contexts. And so that's one area of work. And then we have a very active practice group that's working on race, equity, and liberation, and how that relates to stance and forward stance and embodied practice. In addition, we also are really excited about experimentation and innovation. And so we've launched an innovation fund where different organizations and folks not affiliated with organizations are able to access resources to just try an idea. Just try an idea. I think we spend a lot of time and resources. In some ways, it's a movement habit that we have and a change habit to spend a lot of time planning and a lot of resources traveling to meetings where we're planning versus just getting out there and trying things with our neighbors, with our peers, and just seeing what happens and learning from that. And that's part of the strategic navigation piece. And so that's another element of the network that we're really excited about. And as we move forward, there are a couple areas that are emerging related to responding to emergent opportunities in the ecosystem, and then also thinking about how political organizing relates to all of this change work that we're trying to do. So I will pause there and see where we go next.
Great. Thank you so much, Aimee. And you guys are all giving just a little taste, getting a taste of their stories and the network. So look forward to finding opportunities after this webinar. So I'd like to ask Rosa and Annika to join us back on video. And we're going to take a couple of really wonderful questions that we got through the Q&A and chat. We have only room for probably a couple of questions, but if people do have other ones, go ahead and list in the chat. So, couple things. One is that transformative strategy really emphasizes the practicing of the qualities of the vision that we want to build, and then emanate from there, so that we're creating that future world right here and right now, and feeling from there. So one of the questions is, how does the practice of authentic communication interrupt judgment? And that in a normal strategy session, that might not seem part of strategy, but we all know from our work that judgment and competition is what often brings our coalitions and collaborations down. How does practice authentic communication? Just a couple, maybe Annika and Aimee would love to hear that in your work.
So this is an example of, no, I'm joking, we're trying to be too polite. So what does the practice of authentic communication look like? Well, I mean, I think actually part of what was mirrored on this webinar, right, of talking from a place of deep connection and grounded in story, and speaking our truths, and being knowing that when we actually practice authentic communication, it's because for me, it's around integrity of self, and also around the belief and the value in the relationship with the other, right? And centering that. And for me, one thing that I've been much more reminded of is around the practice of deep listening, right? And what it means to listen and kind of strip perception and strip things, and really what does that openness look like? I think for me, you know, there's a tendency, I think, in me to be a little judgmental. And so I have to challenge myself around that. And when I am not doing that to my fullest and greatest potential, I know that I have folks who call me in around that.
Yeah, and with clarity from the person, a clarification from the person who asked the question, that she's especially interested in hearing about how to practice not being judgmental, having been someone who receives it and dishes it. Thank you for owning that. I think we all have. Aimee, any words from your end?
Sure, yes. Just taking a minute to gather my thoughts. I feel like part of it is, this is just what's coming to mind. Around the judgmentalism aspect of it is sort of, or a practice that I try to cultivate, is sort of seeing myself in, like, sort of seeing wholeness and seeing like myself in others. Do you know what I mean? Like this sort of radical empathy or radical connection, even with people I don't agree with, or even, right? Like that's part of sitting next to a family member at a holiday dinner that I know has used violence, right? Like how do it has to be accountability there, but also how to hold some radical love. So I would actually be really interested in hearing what Rosa has to say about this, because I actually think the question came up, Rosa, when you were talking, and so I'd be super curious to hear.
Yeah, it's such a good, I'm so glad someone raised it, because I think it's part of our lifelong journey, especially when we look at it in ourselves. I think part of it is looking at what's at the root of the judgment, and often it's disconnection, and feeling feeling disconnected and maybe helpless. And so one way that we deal with that is to project judgment. I'm working with a group right now that is developing a statewide strategy, and they had disconnections based on some judgments around stances that folks took. And so one of the ways we started the work together was to name what were some of these underlying tensions. And it was so interesting because, you know, we have a tendency to dance around it and talk about it vaguely, and then people really spoke up as we were naming what are the movement practices or what are the old habits that have gotten in our way, and what are the movement practices that we need to move forward. And we need to name the tensions specifically and clearly and directly with people, so that we can talk about what it was directly and build that trust, so that we can move forward. Even if we don't end up being aligned on the same strategy, we've named it with each other, as opposed to talking about, you know, I don't know why that group is doing that and they're not really down with this or that, because that just undermines the power. So I think, being an inquiry and then just trying it out. How do I, instead of, what's the sense of power I'm getting by judging someone? And how could I build real power by actually addressing it directly with them in a way that builds connection and trust?
Thank you. And we're going to end a final question on, you know, in these times when there is obviously a ton of urgent action that's necessary, how do you make the case for taking the time sometimes for that level of transformative approach? What is the slowdown that might have more? How do you convince people that there is a need to slow down to speed up?
It's interesting because I think when we're really doing our personal work and rooting in transformation as like core to what we're doing, I actually don't think it takes more time. It's just a theory, but I think, because it's not like, okay, let's go over here and do the relationship stuff and then we'll get to the real work. It's like, it's just how we approach it. And so I think, you know, there's some exciting examples of how far you can go by taking the time to focus there. And just a couple, we already talked about Standing Rock and But it's such a powerful example of like just taking the time to be in prayer together, and to like that just cultivates so much strength that helps navigate things in real time way more quickly and swiftly than if we like were just focused on logical linear planning. And then also I just was reminded, speaking of the Hawaiian sovereignty movement and a focus, some of, Norma Wong's close partners in that sovereignty movement focused, and, and the Hawaiian people focused on reclaiming their practice of building and boats and navigating the open waters, and how much that cultivate a sense of cultural pride, togetherness, and also the practices of strategic navigation that then directly inform how they're doing their movement work. And so, so many exciting examples of the power of that.
Thank you all so much. We could be here another hour with all of you, and unfortunately we're at our time. I do want to really thank all three of you for your fantastic presentations and opening up yourselves to share who you are and what transformed you to do this work. And we want to, I want to ask for a moment or two of folks to stay on. This is the last of our webinar series, and we could not have done this without a huge team of amazing people. So I'm going to ask Chelsea, Emily, Jovita, Kristen, Leanne. We have an amazing crew of people. Get on the camera. And Jovita, you're on? Okay. This is, and also Erica couldn't join us, Erica Woodland, but this is a team of people that put this amazing set of webinars together. Jovita is the executive producer, co-producers Emily and Julie Quiros, who you heard from on the first webinar. Second, sorry, see, Jovita's correcting me here. Content, Erica helped put together. Leanne and Kristen are amazing illustrators. Leanne did all the beautiful illustrations and graphics that you see. And Kristen was the original concept who came up with this crazy idea in the first place. So really want to, and Chelsea has been with us through this whole journey and practicing with us and keeping us laughing behind the scenes. So just want to really, and Joe, is there anyone who you want to make sure to, did I leave it? You. Oh, and I joined you guys too. So it's been a fantastic journey, and the reason this works is because of the enthusiasm, the relationship, the living out of all these practices that we've done with the participants on this webinar. You can, I mean, Rosa pointed it out, you can see the beautiful community that has been created here, and this community is a beacon of hope for many movements at this moment. And so we look to you all and the love and the care and the brilliance and the strategy and the everything that you bring. And we need everyone at this moment to meet this incredible historic time we're in. And I'm very glad to be ending 2016, but I'm excited and hopeful for 2017 because of the care, love, and community that this set of participants has. So we have an evaluation we want you to fill out. You'll be getting it by email, and we have taken that, all your feedback, really, really to heart and seriously, and are very excited to continue building with all of you. So big thank you to Rosa, Annika, and Aimee, and all of the participants in this webinar. Thank you, and and Jackie. I see Jackie also on the text. She's been an incredible partner in all of this as well. So I don't know if you can, she's in another room, but thank you, Jackie. All right, thank you all so much. And I don't know, Joe, any last word? No? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar series. See you in 2017.
Good job.
Yeah. Awesome.
Do you think there'll be a debrief, Rosa?
That's what I was wondering. That's why I stayed on for a second.
Yeah. Save the chat and end the meeting.
Okay. We will
Hi, it's so nice to see you, Kristen.
this webinar and start a new one to do a debrief.
Will you just make sure you save the chat first?
Okay.
Okay. Are you going to send us a new link?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks.